Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and every once in a while I'm watching a concurrently airing anime, a specific episode comes along that leaves me really wanting to talk about it. And, this has happened with me before with a few series in seasons past, series such as 18 If or Sentor no Noyami, Interviews with Monster Girls, where just a really special episode came along. And I haven't been reviewing the series on whole. I've just been watching it and enjoying it, that kind of thing. And sometimes I'll do a, series overview review after it's all said and done. But in this case, I really found myself wanting to do that with a currently, as of the time of this recording, running anime, that being Garo Vanishing Line, episode 16, the latest episode as of the time of this recording. I found there to be an emotional resonance with this, and it was really impactful to me. And I kind of wanted to speak about it in also making a comparison, a parallel to one of my favorite episodes from my all-time favorite anime series, Cowboy Bebop, that being the episode known as Waltz for Venus, which I think is very comparable. Even though they're two completely different stories, I think they are comparable in the emotional weight that they contain. And they're both very much stories about brothers and sisters. And, as being an older brother myself, who is the guardian of a younger sister for a very long time after the loss of our parents, it's something that resonates that much more with me. But I think even if you don't have that in mind, you could definitely see the impact and the weight of the events as they unfold in either of these episodes. And but it was so sort of emotionally impactful to me, and there were so many little sort of, almost imperceptible similarities that I almost felt like this episode of Garo Vanishing Line might have been a sort of homage to Waltz for Venus from Cowboy Bebop, even down to one of the characters looking very similar to the character in Cowboy Bebop in this episode of Garo Vanishing Line. I don't want to speak too much about the series on whole, just to give you a little bit of an idea. If you haven't watched Garo Vanishing Line at all, it's surrounding the characters of Sword and Sophie, most notably, but there are other surrounding characters. Sword is a golden knight, and Sophie lost her slightly elder brother, off screen sometime before the show began. And her pairing up with Sword, knowing that he is this, golden knight, this warrior for good and all this kind of stuff, he fights off these creatures known as horrors, which are evil and can sort of possess people and ruin lives, and people go missing and all this kind of stuff as a result of these horrific creatures, as well as the evil people behind them that wield them at certain times. Sophie, the girl, witnesses Sword dispatching some of these. He saves her life and protects her. And so she realizes he may be able to help, because apparently there's something revolving around these horrors known as El Dorado. It's a place. And this was one of the last clues she was clued in on that saw and surrounded the disappearance of her slightly older brother. So, when she figures out, El Dorado is something Sword is familiar with, it's something, revolving around these horrors, these creatures that Sword fights, maybe I can enlist his help, and we'll go on a quest, we'll go on a journey, we'll try to fill in the gaps, the missing information, figure out what and where El Dorado is, and maybe that'll reunite me with my brother and all this kind of stuff. And so it's a really fun, slightly adversarial at times character dynamic between Sword and Sophie, and you really begin to glean with this episode in particular, episode 16, as I say, that there's almost a sibling rivalry effect going on there. They did make a passing reference to the fact earlier in the series that Sword had a younger sibling whom he lost. And it didn't really occur to me until this very specific episode that, in a way, the character dynamics, Sword is beginning to see his sister, his younger sister, whom he lost, in Sophie, in a manner of speaking. That's why he's so protective of her. That's why they really exploit and showcase that character dynamic in the OP as well as the ED animation. While you have all these other, mitigating circumstances and sideline characters and everything like that, some of which come into focus for an episode or two, it's still the main through line is Sword and is Sophie. And it kind of reminded me, because when they get to the town, it's like this beachside, very bummish town that they get to in this episode on their quest. Sophie is absolutely just, hateful and enraged that Sword has eaten her special chocolate that she's been saving and wanting to, share with he and Gina, the woman who's traveling with them, where he is a golden knight. She is a Makai alchemist, I believe, sort of a mage. And they are for, the side of good against the horrors and all the evil and everything like that, the Black Knight and whatever, and whomever the leader of the horror faction is in El Dorado. But so Sophie, in being so enraged, she and Gina go off on their own, and Sword is left to his own devices. And he ends up running into this young lad by the name of Pedro, who is being chased through an alley by some gang people, and they're pretty much going to carve him up in the alleyway right then and there. Sword intervenes and ends up spending some time with young Pedro, and finds out, basically what Pedro's backstory is. It is very much revolving around he and his fiancée or girlfriend from years past. It goes into how they met. She was sort of a bar hostess. He came in, spent time with her. She was very affectionate toward him, and their relationship just began to grow and develop. They would spend more time and more time and more time around each other, and he would celebrate her birthday and give her a surprise party and everything. And they made bracelets for each other, and they were sort of cheaply made, so they made this vow that, when it comes a time for these bracelets to snap apart, which they inevitably would, this would signal that they would be both ready to embark on a journey together, leave this bum-laden, town full of creeps and criminals and all this kind of stuff, and go on a grand adventure together and sort of like be wedded, live the rest of their lives together, escape from this hellhole they live in. Only, unfortunately, a gang leader intervened, fate, you might say, intervened, taking her life, because apparently it was an unspoken rule that if you were a young, attractive woman in this, beachside, bum-laden town, you had to be one of, the concubines, one of the call girls, one of the prostitutes, at the ready for all times for the gang and such like that. And she would not go along with that. I think her name was Monica. She would not go along with that because of her love for Pedro, and just, because who would willingly go along with that? And so her life was cut short, and thus Pedro is seeking vengeance against the gang leader. And this sort of compels Sword to think back on his own history, where he is a very angry young man in the wake of the loss of his younger sister. Now, it's quite interesting how they dole out this information in this episode. It's kind of edited out of sequence. The continuity is a little bit questionable, because I think the first scene you see is his standing outside the school his sister attended, and it's all ruins. And you hear someone, talking off screen about how it all came to pass, how these creatures known as horrors may have had some involvement. El Dorado is a thing, a sort of little clue to spur, Sword's curiosity on, and he's very contemptful after that, and he's very enraged, and he just starts fighting anything he can fight, much as Pedro has been doing. And the whole sequence, again, it begins with the aftermath of his sister's death, but then he immediately calls back to a graveside proclamation that he makes to his younger sister that, in the wake of the loss of their parents, was the impression I got. He's embracing his sister and looking down on her and saying, "I'll always be there to protect you. I'll always be there for you." And this also then follows up with, sometime later, after he's been inducted into the, sort of conglomerate, the group or whatever that are going to make him become a golden knight, this battler and hero for good against the horrors and the darkness and everything. He meets a young woman who's feeding him like spinach and trying to get him bulked up and get him stronger. everything like that. So it's a little bit hard to follow if you're not really scrutinizing and you only have a vague sense of familiarity with everything they've talked about in the series up till that point. Because of its being edited out of sequence, I saw someone asking on my anime list in the forums talking about this specific episode. Well, wait, if his sister died, who is he holding at the gravestone? Well, that was his sister at a younger age. That was when he was promising her he was going to protect her. Unfortunately, the way they doled it out, we first saw the time just after she had died. And at that point, he was recollecting back to the promise he made. And that was, ushering forth the sense of guilt that he now felt because he wasn't able to protect his sister. His sister still, had her life cut short, and he wasn't able to be there for her the way he had vowed and promised. And so it was touching upon the guilt he felt, the resonating frustration and anger and rage that would subsequently follow on and lead him to lashing out, gaining the attentions of the people who would make him the Golden Knight. And in this way, this is how he has such a rapport with young Pedro. He can completely understand, even though it's a different relationship dynamic, where it's Pedro's fiancée, girlfriend, whatever you want to say, and not a sibling, that sense of loss was still very much permeating for both of them. And it was still the instigator, the impetus behind their lashing out for both of them. And so Sword is reluctant to really get involved, and Pedro's going to have his way one way or the other anyway, no matter what Sword says. And he almost gets his own life cut short. He goes on the attack. He tries to attack this gang leader. And at the last second, Sword intervenes and saves the kid's life. And at that moment, sort of to punctuate the hopeful redirection of Pedro's life, his bracelet that his girlfriend had given him snapped off. Thus calling back on the vow that they made, that maybe it's time to leave once that happens. Let's leave this hellhole behind and seek a better life, seek some purchase elsewhere. And it was really symbolic and really beautiful. And just the fact that, it's really showcasing the fact that for the loss of Lizzie, Sword's younger sister, Sophie has kind of begun to fill that void, but similarly so, Sophie's own loss of her slightly elder brother. It's like they are both very complementary to each other in a sibling sort of dynamic. And so when they do fight over the chocolate and juice that he consumed that was hers, that she was saving for a special occasion, when they do apologize and he brings her some broken, like Valentine's chocolate that he gets out of like a shop on the city street somewhere. It's just really funny how they both try to apologize and make amends with each other, but it's very much from a sibling point of view. Even though they are not related, even though he's kind of become her guardian impromptu to fill out the mysteries surrounding the horrors and El Dorado, this overhanging clue of where they might have gone. It's a place that is involved in some way, where she's hoping to be reunited with her brother, and where he's hoping to gain answers going all the way back to the loss of his younger sister. It's just a really beautiful and elegant package when it's all put together, when it's all said and done. And it's very much the same sort of emotional resonance that always carried for me with the Cowboy Bebop episode, Waltz for Venus, as I say, where you have the Bebop crew, Spike, Faye, Jet. I don't remember if Edward is part of the group at that point or not. But they, the episode sort of begins with them trying to take down these hijackers of a spaceship, a spacefaring vehicle. They land on Venus, and the young man that Spike will encounter, Rocco, who is very much almost a spitting image for Pedro in this episode of Garo Vanishing Line. Pedro kind of looks like a slightly younger version of Rocco. They look very similar. But in any case, Rocco is wowed by Spike's martial arts and his sort of whatever happens, not really given any F's attitude. he's enamored by that, and he starts, clasping onto Spike's coattails all through the episode, annoying Spike to high heaven. Teach me, man, teach me, master, teach me how to be as fluid and fluent in martial arts so I can kick all kinds of ass with these, he doesn't say it, but, the unspoken thing is with these gang people I'm involved with, which all revolves around a stolen plant, a priceless medicinal plant that he has made off with, which was the property of this particular gang leader. They wanted to make, billions off of it or whatever like that. And he makes off with it because he has a sister who is ailing. She's blind. Her name is Stella. And he is very much all about trying to get his hands on this plant because it is the signature thing that can heal and bring back her vision, heal her eyes and bring her vision back to her. And so unfortunately, much as was the case with Pedro, getting all involved with the gang, trying to take vengeance out on the gang, which created all kinds of trouble for him. In the case of Rocco in the Cowboy Bebop episode, he has stolen this plant and now he's, under the thumb of the gang. They want to kill him. And spoiler warning for those who haven't seen the episode, he does not make it out of the episode alive. Unfortunately, his fate catches up with him. But in the intervening sequences, Spike ends up going and seeking out his sister, learning more about him, what his impetus was, why he's trying to get after this plant. And he realizes that Stella, his sister, is blind and realizes what the motivations are. Tragically, not only is Rocco's life cut short, but the plant itself ends up getting destroyed, all but for a couple of seeds that are left over. And even the seeds are near priceless. But it just so happens that now being, emboldened by what Rocco had sought to do to heal his sister, and also in a fashion very sort of similarly to how it's a different dynamic, but it's emotionally equating between Sword and Pedro. Sword lost his sister, Pedro lost his girlfriend, his fiance. Very similarly, could Spike, sort of relate to Rocco in the fact that, his whole back history with Julia, losing out his love of his life in the tragic way that he did. And so he very much grows to have a rapport with Rocco and sort of empathizes with him. So he ends up smuggling some seeds back to Stella, back to her doctors. And it really ends bittersweetly where, when he goes and revisits Stella one last time, she questions, she's very excited about the fact that Rocco managed to get her these seeds that are going to heal her, that are going to bring her eyesight back. But she does question Spike as to why he hasn't come and visited her. Is he ever going to? Is she ever going to see him again? And she reaches out to Spike's face where he has fallen silent, and she begins to understand that Rocco was the subject of his own poor choices, and that they aren't going to see each other again. And both episodes just almost got me crying. Even in talking about it now, especially Waltz for Venus, the Cowboy Bebop episode, it always brings me to tears. Even if I weren't an elder brother, the protective overseer of a younger sister in the loss of our parents for so many years, even without that, I think I would still find it emotionally impactful. But it is that much more so because I am an older brother, and because I do love my sister so much and want to take care of her and protect her and always be there for her. And, both of these episodes had so many shades of both of those things. Again, a story about brothers and sisters, but also just about love and companionship and friendship and being there for someone and then the loss of that person, whomever they might have been to you, and how that will affect you and how that will sometimes steer you down a dark path, but sometimes it'll steer you down a path of redemption. One of the lasting sort of overhanging things Sword, departs Pedro having said to him is, in seeking the vengeance against her murderer, would your girlfriend want you to take a life? Become a monster? I myself lost my younger sister, and I have vowed to live on for her, because who's going to remember her otherwise but myself? I'm the only one. And as long as I'm living and breathing and living every day, putting my best foot forward, I'm still living on in her memory. And I, she still lives on through me, is what he imparts. And it's very much kind of a similar thing in the Bebop episode where Stella is now forever going to be living on and choosing life and making better choices for the loss of her brother, who really just got into a bad fix because of how much he cared about her and wanted to help her. And so both of these episodes are just really emotionally impactful, really weighty, great writing, great pacing. Again, I would argue with the Garo episode 16, it was a little bit wonkily edited where it was a little confusing. The sequence, everything, was showcased in the flashbacks surrounding Sword and his sister. But both of which were just phenomenal, poignant episodes. And so that's really just kind of what I wanted to share and impart with you guys. Anyone who happens across this video didn't really want to talk about Garo, Vanishing Line, or even Cowboy Bebop on whole, what the entire series is about for each of them. Just specifically wanted to talk about these two special episodes within them. And the similarities as I felt them, the emotional resonance and connectivity I found between them both. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you happen to be watching Garo Vanishing Line as of the time of this recording, if you've seen this episode, what you thought of it, what you think of the series overall, as well as Cowboy Bebop. If you've ever seen, Waltz for Venus, if you've ever seen Cowboy Bebop on whole, what you thought of that particular episode, what you thought of that series on whole. And so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this discussion, talking very much about the emotional weight and connectivity of these two respective, very poignant episodes. And otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.